Holy Christ, don't let her scream, he prayed. And then it suddenly occurred to him that the girl couldn't possibly have heard his scream, couldn't possibly have heard a sound carried from his chamber to hers, the stone causeway dividing them. Puzzled by this thought, and losing now in this pre-dawn air so full of a particular sort of dew-heavy fatality the sharper edges of his anxiety, he made the excuse to himself of resettling the folds of the rug above her throat and propped her body, all bundled up, all mute and struggling, against one of the stone parapets of the bridge. Far away in the west he could see the large, low-hanging, shapeless moon, no longer sick-looking and yellowish, but steely, cold, and bright, and sailing scornful and proud in a blue-black gulf that held not a single star. For less than half a second, Mr. Gurd's warm, thick, Christ-supported nature felt the ice-cold paw upon its throat of the unappeased Cerberus of life-devouring annihilation. Holding tightly to his living bundle and unconsciously giving its little taps with the rim of the flat candlesticks, whose flame was being blown sideways so ghastly that it was almost extinct, Mr. Gurd stared into the cold blue-black emptiness that surrounded that distorted moon. He projected his human consciousness as if it had been a stone slung from a catapult. Such stones, no doubt, had been flung into the days of Blethyrus from this very parapet, till it reached the side of that radiant abortion. From that vantage ground in space he projected it again till it reached the unthinkable circumference of the astronomical universe. From this dizzy point he surveyed the whole sidereal world, the whole inconceivable ensemble of etheric and stellar and telluric matter. Contemplating this ghastly and mind-bewildering enormity, Mr. Gurd, tapping the dark bundle he held with the now quite extinct candle, thought to himself, "My mind has something in it, some background, some basis of secret truth that is completely outside the visible world, outside the whole staggering vision of matter. Without the existence of this something else, I could not envision this immense universe at all. Without this deeper thing, there could be no universe." His thoughts at that point suddenly became something that was quite different from thought. He felt as people feel when in the midst of a vivid dream they get the sensation that, if they pleased, they could wake themselves up. This bundle he held, those beech tree tops down there, that huge stone buttress descending into the moonlit shadows, this shape-smelling blown-out candle, why, they were all half insubstantial, half unreal. But the Christ by his side was wholly real. The Christ within him and about him belonged to a reality that any minute could reduce all this to a pinch of dust, of thin dust, to feed the caverns of eternity. He was startled out of this trance by nothing less than an audible murmur from the bundle he carried. "Please take me in, Mr. Gurd," sighed this muffled sound. "I am good now." He raised her incontinently from the perilous edge of that high parapet and bore her over the bridge of the door to the archway. This door he found ajar. It was easy for him to swing it open and for his foot to carry her forward. Down one step they went, down another step, then they emerged into her own warm, firelit room. So brightly was her fire burning, she must have fed it with fresh fuel before she left the turret, that the sheets of her bed, rolled up as when she had tossed them back, gleamed white as swans down on the rosy glow. He carried her across the floor and laid her gently upon those discordant sheets. With fingers tender as a woman's, he pulled away the coverlet from her face. There were her big, amused eyes. There were her brown curls. There was her tremulous mouth, the lips divided in a reassuring smile. "Sorry I was cross," she whispered. "I'll go to your Miss Crow's, and you shall ask Ned for me to supper. Did you see the Ghost of Merlyn, Mr. Gurd?" How long have you been a good girl like this, Lady Rachel? He asked. Since the moment you picked me up from the floor, she answered. I thought to myself, it's worth getting into a rage to be carried. It's worth getting into a rage to be carried to bed by the Mayor of Glastonbury, and so I stayed still. I liked your carrying me, Mr. Gurd. It felt like a doll. You'll keep your promise, Rachel, and help Mr. Barter with those little images? She made an effort to get her arms free of the purple coverlet, but he laid his hand on its surface and stopped her. Good night, he said. I'll find my way back. It's moonlight now. I believe you will make Glastonbury all you want it to be, she cried with shining eyes. Her face looked so fragile emerging quaintly from the folds of the rug and resting on the white sheet that, hardly realizing what he was doing, he bent down and kissed her cold cheek. Good night, Lady Rachel, he repeated. Back once again in King Mart's vast, dusky chamber, Mr. Gurd set himself seriously to think of his grand design. The girl's words, you will make Glastonbury all you want it to be, had started a train of cognition that was hard to bring to a pause. To confess the truth, too, he felt a little chilly now in his flimsy bed without that noble covering. But his mind went back to that vast array of ancient folios in the room where Will Zoylan had challenged him. What those old scholastics aimed at, he thought, I shall fulfill. All their fine-spun logic is dipped in Christ's blood, and I shall make of that blood a living fountain of chalice on Chalice Hill, to which all the nations of the earth shall come for healing. He tried to warm himself by rolling the bedclothes tightly around his body, very much as he had rolled the purple coverlet around. And there it was, the two beings, the old magician's paramour, and the sweet young creature who so believed in the power of young poor John Gurd, had at last merged into each other. Well, that was how it should be. There was destiny in it. He had been well advised to ride over to Moor on the day of Christ's resurrection. The old magic monger had vanished with his heathen Grail. So Mr. Evans said, in the heart of Chalice Hill. Well, he, Bloody Johnny, this new miracle worker, would show the world before he vanished that the real Grail still existed in Glastonbury. Wrapped up like a great fat chrysalis in his bedclothes, with his big white face turned in the dying fire, Mr. Gurd now awaited the first approach of the dawn. His long vigil that night seemed to have left his brain prematurely clear. He began to review in calm retrospect the illumination he had received that night as he clutched his living bundle on the edge of those moonlit gulfs of space. I know now, he thought, what the Grail is. It is something that has been dropped upon our planet, dropped within the earthly atmosphere that surrounds Glastonbury, dropped from somewhere else. I don't know, he went on thinking, of what substance this thing is made, or whether it was flying into our material dimension purposely, or by accident, or by... It is evidently possessed of radiations that can affect both our souls and... Everyone who believes in it increases its power. That at least is clear. Wherever it came from. He stared up at the dark, massive rafters, catching desperately at a thought which tantalized him and evaded him. Sometimes in dreams, he thought, some little inanimate thing becomes terrible to us, becomes tremendous and terrible, producing ghastly shiverings and cold sweats. I once woke up, he thought, crying out, "The twig! The twig!" And it was a little twig from off some bush that I had seen, just a little tiny twig. I think it was of a dark brown color. Sometimes the color in these things is very important. It was bent, yes, I'm sure of that. It was a little dark brown twig and it bent at one end. He once more felt that he was on the very brink of catching hold of some tremendously important clue. Little inanimate things, he thought. can become great symbols, and symbols are... No, he thought, bugger me black. That's not what I meant at all. I mean something much deeper, much more living than symbols. Bugger me black, what do? I mean, certainly material objects can become charged with supernatural power. That's what I mean. They can get filled with a kind of electricity that's more than electricity, with a kind of magnetism that's more than magnetism. And this is especially the case when you heard a half-extinguishing brand in the center of the dying fire fall heavily among the red ashes. And for the tick of a second, his heart began to beat again, wildly, helplessly, violently, just as if it had been when he heard, or dreamed he heard, that terrible voice. This is especially the case when a number of people, century after century, has believed thought is a real thing. Here Mr. Gaird's own process of thought, as he tugged at his pillow up to prop up his head a little, was interrupted by a prickling of his conscience. His efforts to get the pillow into a comfortable position conveyed his mind over the 7 miles of moonlight water meadows to his sleeping wife. He remembered how the gray head of that descendant of the House of Rise always lay on her own pillow, at her own side of the bed, leaving his all smooth and undisturbed and never removing it. He remembered how astonished she had been to learn from Crummy, who loved to play the role of sentimental ambassador between her mother and father, that all the time he was away in Norfolk with Canon Crowe, Megan Gurd had left his pillow untouched in its place. But he made an effort in his will and dismissed Megan completely from his mind, as completely as if they had never lived together. In these deep interior inhumanities, Mr. Gurd was shameless. This devotee of Christ frequently took up his conscience by the heels and hung it clear outside the remotest house walls of his consciousness. He now worked the interior cogs and pistons of his mind till, like a great gaping engine, with grappling irons held outward towards those dusky rafters about him, his consciousness adjusted itself to catch a clue that kept teasing and tantalizing him. Thought it a real thing, he said to himself. It is a live thing. It creates, it destroys, it begets. It projects its living offspring. Like certain forms of physical pain, thoughts can take organic shape. They can live and grow and generate independently of the person in whose being they originated. For 1,000 years that Grail has been attracting thought to itself because of the magnetism of Christ's blood. The Grail is now an organic nucleus of creation and destruction. Christ's blood cries aloud from it by day and by night. Yes, yes, so his thoughts ran on. Yes, and bugger me black, this was a queer original oath peculiar to Mr. Gaird's. I know what the Grail is. It's the desire of the generations mingling like water with the blood of Christ, and caught in a fragment of substance that is beyond matter. It is a little nucleus of eternity, dropped somehow from the outer space upon one particular spot. Here Mr. Gaird stretched out his head, like a mud turtle, and peered down at the crack of the floor, through which he had heard the odd couple in the room below relieving nature. I hope, said Mr. Gaird to himself, that this extremely nervous surgeon didn't forget to give me my pretty daisy queen a good feed of oats. And that's the end of chapter Mark's Court. Next time we'll have chapter Silver Bowl, the Silver Bowl. It's kind of reminding me of Stalker there, or Roadside Picnic, when he's talking about the Grail in Glastonbury. Anyway, till next time.